Hello and welcome to our daily sketching routine. It is Tuesday, November 3rd, December 3rd, 2024. And today's topic will be, I'm going to call it profile exercises or drawing profiles. I'm just going to put a note for myself here. And originally, I was working on some sketches yesterday, and I had called it hair profile, but I ended up just drawing a bunch of profiles. But we'll include some hair in this one. So, hair, profile drawing, and some exercises. So there's a lot of stuff as usual to go over, and we'll just kind of take our time and do some art. And welcome back if you're returning. Welcome if you're new. I do art every day and post every day, and I use timers to stay focused and to build a daily sketching habit. So today I'm going to do 10 minutes because a lot of stuff I want to go over, and I want to do some. I'm going to draw a portrait of Elizabeth Taylor because I did one of Anthony Hopkins. I just kind of randomly found a picture, and I was looking up celebrity profile photos because I wanted to do one that has a likeness so that you can tell who I'm drawing, and it's not exactly like looking like him, but you can tell, I think. So I kind of wanted to go over that, like how to do that, and I'm gonna pick Elizabeth Taylor because she has a famous profile and pretty iconic. I don't really want to make my channel about drawing portraits from photos. I mean, I've done some of that, and so I'm not really gonna post like a photo or anything, but I mean, she has a lot of famous photos. I just looked up like a profile photo of Elizabeth Taylor, so I'll do it right here, and I'll do it in a certain way and a certain technique because this will be an extension of yesterday's video, which was about how to was called sketching profiles for fun, and it used sort of construction methods. It wasn't exactly Loomis method, it was sort of my ideas basically just for fun, because after a while, I mean, you realize there's not one way of doing any of this, and so that's what we did yesterday. And so if you want, I'll post a link to this one. I kind of like to stay with the topic until I kind of run out of ideas for it, so I still have some ideas. Yeah, if you want to check out yesterday's video, I kind of talked about how to do this. And even in that video, I talked about different methods, sort of either start with the face, basically, the profile part, like the focus on that. You could, because sometimes that's the best thing to focus on. Or you can start more with like the overall shape of the head and like the proportions, but in general it was just of construction and just to have more solidity in the and more accuracy. So with that in mind, I'm not going to I'm basically going to use sort of the ideas from this. So if you check that out, this video out, you'll kind of see where I'm coming from. And plus I have a figure drawing playlist that also talks about all this stuff. And so what I did was, as I usually do after I do make a video about a topic like drawing profiles, I kind of just, I'm in the flow state, so I just kind of do more stuff. And yeah, I was gonna do I wanted to take the ideas from yesterday's video and add hair. Now these were from photo reference, but using the ideas from kind of what I went over, how to ideas about proportion and construction, but you'll notice that it's mostly about proportion and shape, and I didn't do the construction. So that's why practicing construction helps, because it's sort of there, like, even if you like don't draw it in. Now if you're learning it, yeah, it's good to draw it in, kind of like the way that I did. And if you want to use pencil and then erase the pencil lines, you can. But if you want to challenge yourself, you can just do it without the construction lines, but it is challenging. And then the even more challenging would be just to just draw it like out of your head. Because I was looking at, so I didn't really need as much of the construction lines because I was looking at photos, and so I could see it. I didn't have to think about it. So I just had to think about sort of how I drew, put down the pen lines. So it's just different approaches is what I'm getting at, and that's why I wanted to do that. But yeah, I didn't really get to like the hair, so I'll do that today with this demonstration. So it'll be a demo, and I'll kind of just talk about stuff, and there's a lot of stuff going on. For example, there's a lot that I learned just from this, because I don't draw a ton of photo portraits. I think it's kind of boring, and I've mentioned before that it's kind of easy. And even in this, so the way that I'm doing it, I wouldn't even necessarily say that it's beginner friendly. I mean, it could be. I feel like drawing portraits just kind of is beginner friendly, and you can have fun with it. But I think to capture a likeness, you have to be more precise. But I mean, it's the same thing. It's just that for a likeness, one good thing about doing that is it teaches you even more about proportion, because that's really what is doing that. So with that said, just to kind of get warmed up and talk about some things. So what I'm going to do here before I I'll do the Elizabeth Taylor portrait here. And yesterday I talked about how I ended up talking about something else in that video, but in this area I had wanted to do kind of more of a freehand portrait, which I could just do just out of imagination, in other words, because sometimes I just like to do that, invent characters basically. But then to do a likeness in that kind of way, where you sort of just freehand it, is challenging, and to do it in pen. So I think that would be a good demo. But before I do that, right here, I thought it could be a good, like another good demo would be, so I was looking at a photo, and when I'm looking at a photo, to make it interesting to myself, I just do stuff to make it more challenging. So in this case, I wanted to really render the face, and so I basically just use my usual felt tip pen, Papermate, and then this is a Sharpie pen, which is thinner, so just a thinner line, and just between the two I was able to achieve this effect. And I'm just going to leave it for, I feel like it's a sketch, so, and kind of a drawing, like it's pretty tight, but then you can see how loose you can be, and then how tight you can also be, and how detailed you can be. So for the first part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use from the previous video, that was a method of construction, and there's different ways of constructing a drawing, and in this case constructing like the head, and there's different methods. There's the famous Loomis method, there's other methods, but his does kind of work well, that's why it's popular. In yesterday's video you kind of saw sort of some of my ideas. There's just different approaches to it, just like with I like to use playing guitar as an example because that's something that I practice. Just like you could play chords at different places on the guitar and the fretboard, it's the same thing. It just depends on the sound in that case. So this depends on the look you're going for. So I wanted to go for something more loose. So there's levels to it. So you could do it the way I'm going to show you. You could be even more precise. I feel like if that's kind of what the Loomis method allows you to be. It was sort of a mix of being able to draw from imagination, but also from reference or from life. You could grid it if you really want to go in that direction. You could trace it if you want to go in that direction. And ultimately, at this point, you could just generate an AI image of the person. So that's not really, that's another topic. But so that's 10 minutes. And so, yeah, I usually like to use the first session to kind of get warmed up to both sketching and also the video itself. So I'll start another 10-minute timer. So yeah, to begin with, what I'm going to do is, now that I did this, so I don't have the photo anymore, I'm just looking at this, and I feel like it's close enough, and I'll just use, so what I'm going to do is use basically what I talked about in yesterday's video, which I'll put a link to, which meant that since I'm using a pen and I don't want a bunch of construction lines, I'm going to, and I'm not looking at a photo, but I'm going to look at this and kind of treat it like it's, I'm going to use it as my reference. So when you do that, so if you're wondering, so these were from photo reference, so if you're kind of wondering how to do this, it depends. If you're using a pencil, you don't have to worry about it so much because you know you can erase, but that's kind of why I don't use a pencil, because it makes me have to be more deliberate. So you're going to do the construction just like what I showed you in yesterday's video, but you're going to be obviously more careful or more subtle about it. So I'm going to establish kind of like how big the face is going to be. And there's just different ways with art. There's just like an infinite way to approach it. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this Anthony Hopkins, this person, but it could be a character. And I've also mentioned how I don't, like, I love to character design, so I have a lot of characters for my world building. And I could make it look like an actor, but it's not good to do that, because one, like, I don't know, like, it's kind of that's their trademark. But I could, and so it's sort of once you kind of know how to draw faces, you kind of have to, in a way, you want your stuff to be more original, but at the same time, I like it to be realistic enough, because I think if you make it too cartoony or too anime or whatever, it just looks too generic to me, in my opinion. But so anyway, with that said, you can add a challenge. So for example, I already know I can draw this, so the lighting is coming from the other side, the opposite side, so you get kind of a silhouette, which I wanted to do because it's challenging with pen and ink to pull that off, to get all the forms and stuff. You have to be, like, it takes longer to do that. And so I'm just going to make the light, so I'm going to make him face the opposite way, and so I'm going to imagine that's where the light is coming from, the opposite side. So that way I can just kind of have an outline, kind of like these. So I wanted to mention that. So yeah, you have to, if we're going to go off kind of the methodology, which is sort of a mix of construction, but also kind of freehand drawing, I'm going to just simply put in like the nose line right here. And then just go off of that. And you have to approach it a little differently because I'm using a pen, and so I can't erase anything, and I'm trying to keep it a certain look. So for example, that has to be more outlined, whereas this one, maybe I could have put down a few more construction lines because I knew I was going to shade over it. And then yeah, I'm just going to use this as a reference. So I wanted to go in the opposite direction so you can see that it's kind of the same reference. So it's kind of the same as using any kind of reference, but you have a likeness is kind of what I meant to say there. So I'm going to be kind of loose with it, and in a way I'm using this as the construction lines is the thing. And I'm going to look at this because there's a few things going on here. One is that I could just make up a profile. So this is good practice for that. Because like I said, if I'm doing a character, I don't want it to look like an actor. But I want it to be realistic, but I don't want it to look like a specific person. So this is kind of good practice for that. So if you were to draw your own, so that you can see how even if I'm looking at reference, I kind of stylize it to where it doesn't look like the reference, because it's one, it's kind of tedious to do that. Two, it makes it look like the person, which I'm not looking for. But then sometimes, yeah, if you wanted, it's a good sort of exercise. That's why I'm calling this profile drawing exercise, because it's also a good exercise to get a likeness, because it allows you to see whether your proportions are correct or not. So what I'm going to do is just kind of use this. So to flip it is also another challenge, by the way, to flip the reference. So this is going to be a mix of me not necessarily trying to make it look like my drawing, but not necessarily look like the reference, because this was from the reference. So hopefully that makes sense. So in some ways I'm wanting it to look, so in some ways this is kind of like a character or something, and I'm wanting to, because when you're doing character design, you're really not going to do this. This is like an illustration or a portrait. When you're doing character design, it's going to be closer to like this kind of thing, like if you're going to draw a comic or something. But the main thing is, for me, is just to challenge myself and also have fun. It's not just about challenging. It's got to be fun, and also fit like the style, the purpose of what you're wanting to do. Because I'm mostly wanting to world build. So what I'm going to do is just kind of take what I learned, but also have this, using this as a reference. That's also another thing, is this idea of studying, which is useful because, one, again, you can gauge your proportions by the likeness. So that's one good thing about it. And so I'm not going to fill up too much of this because I want to have some space. That'll be kind of the... Also, there's time. There's like the element of time, which is... This took about an hour to get this. But that part of that is because I don't usually like do that. So, and plus with the pen, that's the other kind of challenge. So I'm just kind of... It's interesting when you're drawing an older face like this, what to get the likeness, to understand like what is giving it that likeness. There's lines that definitely matter, kind of like the eyes, and so it is interesting. It's good to kind of practice with different ages and ethnicities and all of that. So in this version, I'm not really going to shade everything. I'm going to leave it kind of outlined. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It's just an example. And I'm just kind of taking what I learned about this and applying it here. So it's not a bad idea to, if you just want to practice, to do a likeness, but then if you want to kind of make it into a character, you can do another version of it that has similarities, but it'll look less like the person. But you can still have like the vibe. You can still have kind of the feel of the character. So yeah, that was just something I wanted to get warmed up with, and then, but yeah, let me move on to the next part, which that's 10 minutes right there. Now from here, you could make it a little bit more kind of like a likeness, but I think for like an example, like this works. I feel like I kind of talked about a lot of different concepts there, like how to move away from the reference so that it doesn't look like that person, stylize it enough, but still kind of have like the mood of the character. Because just I mainly am gonna go towards character design, and it is important for me to not have it look like a photo reference for my characters, but have, as I call it, like stylized realism. So I'm just taking some ideas that I learned. And yeah, the person's expression, their like the lines on the face, they contribute to the look. Alright, so now that we did that, let me move on. So for this part, that's kind of what I wanted to do yesterday, was draw a portrait freehand, which isn't difficult. I mean, I could just draw a made up portrait, but I wanted to incorporate like an actress that is recognizable, so that, again, one, just for the demo. Then the other thing is also, yeah, it is good to kind of, because it gives you something to check, so you can say, okay, well, does that look like either the person, or does it look like the reference? So with that in mind, I'm going to figure out how much of the face. So part of that is just the composition. So you can see how I did this. Sometimes I just like to do just a variety, like one, to kind of test the drawing, and then also for just the look of the page. So I'm going to do something like kind of big. So I'm going to determine, and I'm going to be pretty loose about it, and I'll get to the point where I'm rendering it so that you can see like different approaches. So I wouldn't necessarily do this. So even though you're using the same like pen, you can approach things differently. Maybe for someone who, so I'll make it kind of about right here. And I'm not really, that's just kind of like where the head will be. But yeah, it depends on the approach. So for someone who is supposed to be more like delicate looking than like an old man, then yeah, your approach should be should kind of go with that. So as I do this, if I were just making up a character, it wouldn't be so important that I have all the proportions a certain way. It should just look like okay. If you're trying to get a likeness, you kind of have to build it up gradually. Again, you can use a pencil if you want to practice this. It's challenging to do it with a pen, so that's why I wanted to make it interesting for myself and to kind of show you how you can do that. But be light, you could use a, like, so I'm using 2 different pens. These are the smaller ones, so you could do that if you want, if you think that'll help. Also, if I think that when I'm looking at the photo reference, I might think to myself, well, do I want to shade kind of like this, some of the background? If I feel like I may, then I'll still be careful about it, but I'll keep in mind that I can fix some of the contour. So what I'm going to do is, because I did say I wanted to do the hair, just going off of, so I'm keeping in mind the stuff that I talked about in yesterday's video, but it's in here. But since I'm looking at the photo, I don't necessarily have to draw it as much, because the photo is sort of telling me the construction, if that makes sense. That's the benefit of it. So that I can kind of not only construct it and get the proportion correct and work on getting a likeness, but also sort of work on the expression or the gesture of it. Because if the idea is to make it look just like the photo, I don't really see the point, because I'm not a copy machine. Like, the photo is already nice. I don't see why I would want to try to replicate it. I want to bring something, I mean, I want it to kind of look like I'm drawing from life, which is more interesting, or to even go towards like a character, stylized version of them. So you can see that the construction is the main thing here, so that it can kind of start to look like other, like someone else if I wanted to. So I'm just kind of glancing at the photo. Again, I'm not trying to be exactly like the photo, but I'm using it to help me with the construction part of it. And also on top of that, to like make an interesting sketchbook page. And also, like, you'll notice this is helpful. I mean, if I see this, I can see like, okay, like the technique and stuff. And I'll use some of these ideas, but it's a different approach because you're drawing. And I'm gonna blend out some of this. That's the thing when you're collaging a lot of these different kinds of faces, you kind of have to make them, I think it's an interesting look. They're all sort of morphing into each other. So this is still the first pass, and like the next part will still be the first pass. It's the sketch. So there's a lot going on in this video. It's a portrait drawing demo, but it's also a technique demo, a pen and ink demo, and then specifically profile. So for the next part, I'm going to kind of, so it's still the first pass and it's still the sketch. I'm going to start to fill in, like the contour is okay. I don't see anything that's too off about it, as far as like the angle, the overall like shape. And then, so that's kind of the way to, one way to think about it. Like I just kind of started with this, and part of that is because it's because of the likeness. That's why I'm doing it this way, because I'm trying to make it look like something specific. So next, I want to figure out where the eyes go. So I'm going to use the nose as kind of the, and this is, part of this is where the darks, because usually on the face you're going to have certain areas be kind of the, like the darkest areas. So the next thing is kind of important, which is the set of the eyes. And so I want to look at the bridge of the nose and like where the eyes begin. And you should be careful, but if you're using a pencil, you can erase. If you're using a pen, be kind of loose about it so that you can adjust it. And then I'm placing the proportion in an area that I know that I'm gonna adjust anyway, because they're the darkest, like that's where the shadows and stuff will be. And so I'm doing it in a way that that allows me to, since this is the first pass, when I go back in for the shading, it'll allow me to basically adjust. But I'm gonna go on, like with the dark, especially with a pen, you usually want to work on the shadows, because wherever there's light, you really don't want to render. Yeah, it's the whole like less is more kind of thing. Now, my eyes are actually not even that great, so I'm having to sort of guess on some of this stuff, but it's kind of good, like in a way. For the initial sketch, it's kind of good sometimes to not be able to see it that well, so that you get the overall like impression. Because in the photo reference, for example, you still know what you're looking at even by glancing at it. Even if it's kind of far away, you still know who it is. And so that's what I mean by like having the picture read. It reads as that person, like you know what you're looking at. So if you can capture that first pass, then that's good. And then the final sort of detail stuff would be like really zooming into the picture and just getting all the little details. But yeah, it's kind of good sometimes to not be able to see the picture. That's why people say to kind of squint at it, so that you're just getting the big shapes. And as I start to, so these are areas like that I'm sketching in. I'm going back over it, and as I do that, these are areas that I know I can adjust anyway, because I know I'm going to go in and make them darker. And it's a little different because I'm talking and demoing, but I mean, it's still the same, basically the same thing. I have to be more careful. So this is still considered the first pass. And I will most likely shade in the background, but I'm not going to do that yet, because that's the other thing. If you do that, you can't remove it. Like, you pretty much have to just go with it, and it'll throw off the values, and you may not have to do that. So right now, the way this looks, it's kind of similar to what I did here, where these were from photo, but I did them so quickly that they have the potential to be like character designs. And so in a way, like, that's what this is. And so that's maybe an example of how you could also do that, if, again, depending on your style. Like, this is my preferred style. Because I like how I can go more stylized and make it a character, or go more realistic, so to speak, and make it like capture a likeness if I wanted. So I'm gonna call this the first pass right here. I feel like this is a good first pass of either the character or the actress. So like to me, if I have this and if I am drawing from a photo, which I am in this example, I could leave this and then come back to it and keep working on it, or it just makes kind of a good sketch just to have in your sketchbook. I'm gonna work on it some more. I don't know if I started a timer. It looks like I didn't, but maybe I did. Okay, I started another 10-minute timer. So what I'm going to do now that I've gotten here, I'm going to do the second pass. And sometimes it depends on the style you're going for and like the person or the character. Sometimes it's good to just go in with a thicker pen. Sometimes you want to, it just has a different feel. So what I'm going to do is actually get closer to because I have the reference on my laptop. So I'm going to bring it a little bit closer because I usually wear glasses. I just don't have any. I lost my glasses. So I'm going to get a little bit closer to see more detail. And I'm going to, okay, so on the second pass, it's mostly about establishing like the shading. However, if you're doing a likeness, there's also the element of when you go into shade to adjust the sketch so that it looks more like the person. So with that in mind, I'm going to start, because I did talk about doing the hair. So I'm going to start with that. Because one thing is I want the hair to look really good. So when you're shading, as I'm looking at it, I know that the hair is going to mostly be dark. So I'm just going to put down some tone, and I'm going to establish kind of the direction that it's going to go. Just real quick. So this is the second pass where you go in with like you're establishing the shading of the picture. So start to get the pattern down. And that's basically like saying that's the local value of her hair, is that. And then as I do that, I'm going to double check the likeness, which is really just the proportions. So it's things like this. It's like the distance between like where her hair is. And again, this is shading, so not only am I getting the likeness, so if I'm not trying to make it look like a specific person, but I mean, this could be a character also. Now, if it were really a character, I would make it a little bit more cartoony anyway. I would make it more stylized. Because it is easier to redraw someone who is stylized, like more cartoony. So it's a mixture of shading, and be patient with this. I mean, I'm sort of being a little bit quicker because I'm making a video, but at the same time I've had a lot of practice, so there's no reason you can go slower than this, but the process is still the same. So I'm establishing like the light and dark areas, like the initial, so basically the kind of the two values, but now I'm basically introducing like the dark value and leaving myself room to make this be darker. Like I know it's going to be darker than this, while at the same time also demonstrating a way of getting a likeness. This is a technique, and there's other ways, like I said. So like her jawline is pretty faint. So that's also part of the likeness, by the way. It's just stuff like that, because everybody is different in that way. So it's stuff like this, that, like the shape of the nostril. It's little things that really make the likeness. But you can see that overall, though, it's like the overall shape, but then within, it's like the small shapes that really make it, like we're talking about millimeters of difference, like between an iconic profile, a world famous profile. So what I'm doing is, so first of all, the picture, I'm not going to put it up, but I mean, it's a famous picture. So it's like the first thing that popped up when I searched for a profile picture of Elizabeth Taylor. So on the one hand, so it's a photograph. So there's light, that artificial light. So I'm just going to go with that. And anywhere that I see kind of where either there's shadow or the line is going to be darker, kind of like this, where I'm going to kind of thicken up the line. Also keeping in mind that I most likely will kind of fix some things on the background, but I'm not going to rely on that. I'm going to have the outline look good. I'm going to also use it to make adjustments so that it looks more like her. And this is not meant to be that accurate. This is meant to be kind of a freehand, but still you can tell that if you saw it, you would think, oh, that looks like her. So notice that it's important to get this part correct, but that since I know I'm going to kind of shade the background, I'm going to use that as a way to fix some of that. But also, if I didn't shade the background, it would still be okay. And I'm approaching it in a sketchy way on purpose. If I wanted it to not be so sketchy, I would probably do this in pencil, and then once the pencil looks like this, then I would just ink it more deliberately. Just some thoughts. So use whatever works. Like whatever keeps it interesting for you. And that's really what it is as far as capturing a likeness. I mean, if you weren't trying to capture a likeness, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But you'll notice that this isn't meant to be a photograph. And so in some ways, by doing it this way, it kind of looks more like I'm drawing from life, which I prefer. So yeah, I'm also going to use sort of in the photo, I'm just going to use sort of the dark areas, like her hair and whatnot, to make it look more like the person, because that also has a lot to do with the likeness. It's just that kind of thing. But I'm not going to push the values too much. This is the second pass, so really I'm just establishing like the initial light and dark. So yeah, I won't be able to finish this sketch, but one thing to think about is I like to use different stages of sketching so that if I were to just leave it, so I'm not going to be able to finish this, but it still would look okay. It still gives me, it's actually motivating to, like, you want to, like, it looks like there's no real ugly stages. It looks like a sketch, and then it looks like a little bit more detailed sketch, and next would be kind of the third pass would be just push the values, and it's a little different whenever you're wanting to have a likeness. It's part of it is pushing the values, but also tightening up the likeness. So that is another 10 minutes. I'm going to wrap up this video because part of it is you don't want to rush, especially if you're doing a portrait of someone. You have to take time to make sure the little shapes, because we are talking about millimeters of difference that can really make, like, you really have to make some decisions that really determine whether it looks like the person or not. And that's part of the fun of it, of course. That's part of when you know that you succeeded, is if it looks like the person. But then as part of the challenge, it could just be using a different technique, kind of like this. So I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to mess up my sketch, which I'm happy with. And I'll just give you an update whenever I work on it some more. But yeah, like I was saying, I like to kind of, if I just wanted to leave it like this, because sometimes I don't feel like working on a piece or like a sketch, and it's better not to, because then you overwork it. But hopefully that was helpful or entertaining. But yeah, I want to thank you for joining me for our daily sketching routine. And if you like these videos, please support the channel by liking, subscribing, leaving any comments if you feel like it. And until next time, keep on sketching.